Book of Boba Fett is now officially over, and it's time to rank every single episode as well as review the entire season overall. No confirmation yet as the making of this video. We are going to be getting a season 2. Interested to see if that actually happens after kind of the reception to the overall show. I know a lot of us are pretty much just waiting for Mandalorian season 3 at this point, but I thought it was going to be fun to kind of rank every single episode that we did get in this show, and then at the very end give you guys my overall final thoughts and score for the show. So with all that said, guys, make sure to leave your guys' comments down below, because that is the way I want to see your guys' thoughts, as well as hit that like and subscribe button, because we have Moon Knight coming up, we have Doctor Strange, we have a bunch of small indie films that are going to be pretty exciting, as well as Obi-Wan premiering in May. So may the Force be with us coming up soon, but let's get right into this. Coming down at my number 7 is Episode 3, Chapter 3, The Streets of Mos Espa. Now, this is, and you're going to notice something very clearly, that the 3 episodes at the very bottom are directed by Robert Rodriguez. A director that I've actually appreciated, like, what he has made. Alita Battle Angel was very underrated in my book. I had one issue with it, but overall I thought that was a great comeback for him. But when I look at everything else, lately that he has done, it has not worked for me. Besides his Mandalorian episode, I thought that was awesome. The reintroduction to Boba Fett pretty much coming in was badass. But everything that we've gone so far in this show didn't feel stylistic, and I feel that Episode 3 was the weakest of the bunch. Not just because it gave us this Vespa gang that, honestly, like, for me, while I liked, I don't think the execution was greatly inputted on them, and they did feel something outside of Star Wars. It feels like something prequel era, which is fine, but it never the tones just clashed very much for it with the colorfulness in it. It really much felt like something out of Cyberpunk. I think if it would have been introduced in a more of a better way, or even given better development to them, I would have believed in this, because this feels like something that I would have seen like Anakin run into in a Clone Wars episode. And necessarily, I know that he didn't write this show, but he was the one that introduced and executed this idea with his direction, and I found this to just be a little bit lacking, as well as, of course, a lot of my big complaints with this entire season is the way that it's very uneven with the telling of the past as well as the present. Sometimes I was really enjoying the past stuff, sometimes I was really enjoying the present, but it never felt like the flashbacks in the present was very much working with one another, and it feels like it was two different stories that should have been told not concurrently, but separately. The season should have started with the past, then jumped into the present, caught us back up to where we were, and then continued from there. And you'll kind of hear that a lot of my issues with this show just comes out to be that there's only 7 episodes, and they had so much they wanted to do. Well, one of the biggest disappointments for Chapter 3 as well for me was I just didn't like the way that the action was filmed. The car chase sequence throughout the desert Mos Espa, I thought was honestly pretty badly directed, especially going back on a rewatch. The first time I watched it, I was like, oh, this is fine, it's not bad, but watching it a second time, it definitely does not hold up. Brings me to my number 6, and that is Chapter 1, Stranger in a Strange Land. Now, this is, of course, the introduction episode to the entire series of Boba Fett, and a majority of it takes place in the past. What we get in the present kind of just shows Boba Fett where we last saw him picking up the mantle of the daimyo, and I thought this episode was fine and good, but for me, where this entire season ended up going, it feels kind of like a waste, and it feels like Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 should have very much been combined with either its runtime, its story, or again, the past should have been like one big long episode in the beginning, or even 1.5, and then the second episode takes us into what is going on now. That's truly what I believe should have happened. You're gonna hear me say that a lot, but with Chapter 1 for me, there were some fun action sequences. Fennec becomes a badass, these assassins are trying to get him, they're trying to figure out stuff with the mayor, and we also see, of course, Boba take down some giant creature and gain the Tuskens', I guess, honor and respect in that nature, which was cool, because I do say, as much as I have never really loved the Tusken Raiders, this show actually made me start to love them. I love the development of them. I love how it dove into their past and their present and really much who they are on Tatooine. And I actually think, like, now when we look back, anytime that a Tusken Raider has been murdered, you kind of feel bad, because in reality, they're just protecting what originally was theirs. And I think Chapter 1 did establish that in a good way, and continues to do so in Chapter 2, which we will talk about. But again, Chapter 1, it was a solid start to the entire season, but it was way too moving slow, especially when you go back and rewatch it. A lot of these I'm ranking on a rewatch value, as well as how it all feels now that we have every single episode. Whatever I said in my recap reviews might be different than now what I have seen the entire season, which I overall feel was a little bit uneven. Now, coming down to my number 5, it is Chapter 7, In the Name of Honor. The finale of the Book of Boba Fett, and way too much was going on in this episode, in my opinion. While some of it was awesome, do not get me wrong, a lot of it was, again, just rushed in execution. While it is the longest episode of the entire season, and in fact, it might be the longest episode of any Star Wars television series that we've gotten yet. I could be wrong on that. Please don't correct me, but it's pretty damn close at 58 minutes, and still having a post-credit scene showing that Cobb Vanth, spoilers, is alive. And, you know, it does kind of take away from some of the stakes there. I'm curious to see what Cobb Vanth does. A lot of people were predicting that maybe he'll take over the entire Mos Espa and all of Tatooine, which I think will kind of just be like, okay, so Boba, pretty much what Boba wanted to do, he did, and now he's like, okay, someone else can have it. I don't want it anymore, which is really stupid. But anyways, this episode was very much an homage to old school Western shootouts, which I thought all the action, while some of it stylized, was kind of dumb, there were some great moments in there. The jetpacking all around with the Mando, and of course Boba Fett fighting the Pikes was fantastic. I also love the droids that they brought in, because it was very much reminiscent of one of the battle droids from the prequel era, which I thought was great. And also seeing Mando and Boba Fett having to work together, and just in general, the entire Freetown and everyone that they've kind of brought about in this instance to take down the Pikes itself. Even though I never felt like much towards the Pikes, because they really didn't develop them all too much, as well as Cad Bane, which right here, right next to me, I don't know if you can see him, I absolutely love Cad Bane. He's my favorite bounty hunter of all time, and when he was introduced in Chapter 6, I was absolutely flipping my mind out, and I was so excited, because I've been calling it this entire season. And then I watched the episode, and going in, I was pretty much, I didn't want to admit it, but I knew he was probably going to die. I feel like that was the only way to get out of this situation, because Cad Bane is a very dangerous person, and you can't just let him go free. So in that moment, I was very nervous and scared, and he did die. But I will also say this, as much as I do feel that Cad Bane should have either stayed alive longer, or very much so should have been introduced earlier in the show, that way there was that kind of build up to this between Boba Fett and Cad Bane. Because if you've never watched Clone Wars, you have no idea behind their history. And there's a lot behind there, and I wish we would have gotten more references to that. They barely discussed their past, and for me, there's a lot in there that I feel like needed to be in there for more grit. And of course, when Boba Fett does take him out, now there's a lot of theories that Cad Bane didn't die. I'm going to go with the thoughts that he actually did. It makes it very reminiscent to Obi-Wan and Darth Maul's fight in Star Wars Rebels. And if Dave Filoni had his hands involved with this, I think this does kind of go down into how that was, because it was such a short fight, same with the Darth Maul and Obi-Wan, but it was kind of respectful. And I think in context, when I look at everything, it makes sense. But as a fan, I'm also frustrated, because one, Cad Bane should have stayed alive longer, and I feel like would have been a nice antagonizing threat for the future of Boba Fett, maybe in a next season, or in general, maybe even Mandalorian Season 3, whatever they decide to do with this character. I think it would have been cool to see Boba Fett get that destruction later down the road and just kind of bring him back now. But again, he's dead. And also, it was really cool seeing Boba Fett wreck shop with the Rancor, and also seeing Baby Yoda kind of calm it down and use some of its cool powers. There's a lot of fun moments in here, but overall just shows that it's an uneven finale due to the fact that so much stuff is going on, and not a lot of it, while set up, needed more time to marinate. Now at my number 4, it is Chapter 4, The Gathering Storm. Now this is kind of where we started to finally end the past. No more flashbacks, thank God. But what it finally did is move us forward after we get the final flashbacks of Boba saving Fennec, all sorts of things like that. They get his ship back. He goes to try and find his armor, can't find his armor, and it pretty much just catches us up. Some cool moments in there seeing his ship destroy the people who he thought killed the Tusken Raiders, but For me, what was really cool in this moment was actually seeing Boba Fett communicate with the other clans and everything on Mos Espa, and kind of coming down to, this is my territory, so what do you want to do with this territory? And I really like how they were able to deal with that, but as well as dive into certain elements, and it overall just fleshed out a lot for what was coming out to be about the Book of Boba Fett. There's a lot of nice build-up in this episode, I feel like. Out of all the ones that were directed and brought about into here, this was the one that actually started to further out the present storyline a little bit more and fluff it up and say, okay, this is what's going to happen. We're going to war. Also gave us that great hint that Mando was going to be returning in the next episode as well. Overall, Chapter 4 I found to be good, but could have been better when you look at everything on the spanning horizon. Guys, before we get to my top 3 and of course my final thoughts of the entire season, make sure again to hit that like and subscribe button. If this is the way, then you guys know what is the way, as well as comment down below your guys' overall thoughts. I gotta hear your ranking and of course your review of the entire season. Again, as a fan of Star Wars, I love Star Wars. Besides Toy Story, it's my favorite franchise of all time, and I just want the best out of it, but I also will typically enjoy majority of it, even if I do feel like it's uneven. I've always found Star Wars to be that franchise that, while not perfect, is always very enjoyable, and I did enjoy Book of Boba Fett. I just expected a lot better, especially after what we've gotten with Mandalorian Season 1, and especially Mandalorian Season 2. Coming down at my number 3 is Chapter 2, The Tribes of Tatooine. Now, this is our introduction to the Hutt, our introduction to Chrysanthemum into live action, which was awesome, and I squealed, and I was super excited to see that. But majority of this show, in this episode, took place in the past. And for me, this was the best episode that took place in the past. Again, diving in and actually exploring the Tusken Raiders culture a lot more. And as well as the whole entire train heist sequence was awesome and spectacular. I loved how that sequence was filmed, and it was great seeing Boba team up with the Tusken Raiders and kind of furthering out and actually finally becoming one of them in this episode. I found episode 2 to be great, and absolutely out of all the past stuff, this was for me the one that absolutely made me engaged with this show and go, okay, this can work, but it just goes back to my entire thing that I wish the past would have started out the entire season and then brought us into the present, because I've always found that when shows try to do it concurrently, if it's not seamless together or it doesn't feel like they have a molding, like say Arrow used to do, where it's like they find something in the past that actually happens to be with something in the present, and I didn't even love Arrow, but I wish Book of Boba Fett would have done something like that. Again, awesome moment on the train. Love the Tatooine tribe stuff with, of course, the Tusken Raiders and learning a lot more about them. And, of course, Chrysanthemum and the Hutts coming in. I also, just looking at the entire season, wish the Hutts would have been involved a little bit more, because that was an awesome moment. Of course, coming out my number 2 is Chapter 6, From the Desert Comes a Stranger. Now, I was hyped. I've believed since the start of this show that we were going to see Cad Bane. This was the perfect introduction to really much bring Cad Bane into live action, and we finally got him in the penultimate episode when he comes in and guns down Cobb Vanth and of course his deputy, and it really much put his mark on there, and I loved it. And I love that we got a lot more of him in the next episode. Just sucks that he died, because I wanted more of him. I'm very much spoiled when it comes to this character. I love him, but looking besides that, this is very much a sequel episode to the last one, which we will talk about. Clearly, if you've been counting, you know where that one's going to end up. I love how this episode sets up, because we not just catch up with Mando again and seeing his past and of course how he's going to visit his little friend, but he never actually gets to visit his little friend. He just gives the gift over to Ahsoka, which was a big surprise because I had not even heard that she was going to show up in this show. And seeing the relationship and the conversation between Ahsoka and Luke, who Ahsoka is my favorite Star Wars character of all time. So that was awesome to see. And I also love the whole training montage between Luke and Grogu, and then Grogu having to make that choice of Yoda's lightsaber and to continue training with Master Luke, or the chainmail, which of course we knew what he was going to choose, because if you followed along, Kylo Ren was technically Luke's first Jedi student, so we obviously knew, unless they were going to retcon stuff, Grogu was technically not going to be. But the training montage was great. Grogu is learning already a lot from Luke, as we see in Chapter 7, and I can't wait to see how that is further explored in his his future storylines within Mandalorian Season 3 or wherever else he picks up. This was just a really fun episode, and in general, cameos galore. I forgot to completely include R2-D2. Again, this is very much just set up for the finale of where we are finishing out Mando's storyline for this season before we head out into Mando Season 3, and really much catching us up fully with him, Grogu, and Luke. So when Grogu shows up in the finale episode, it all makes sense. I overall really liked this episode. In fact, loved a lot of moments to it, especially the Cad Bane stuff. But when you look back at the entirety thing, the fact that Boba Fett was only in this episode for like 1 minute, that can be an issue when it is your main character. I understand, it's the Book of Boba Fett. But come on, I've read some books where the main character is in every single chapter and page and all that. Without further complaining, my number one favorite episode of this entire show is Chapter 5, The Return of the Mandalorian. The one episode that actually doesn't even feature Boba Fett. And it feels sick even saying this as my number one, but as a pure Star Wars fan, as an entertaining value, the show that absolutely got me hyped, the episode that got me so excited was this one. And there's a lot of depth to that because arguably we've actually gotten more screen time with Din, the Mandalorian, so far than we have ever gotten with Book of Boba Fett himself. Whether you include Clone Wars, Empire Strikes Back, the development we have gotten more with Din is now why we are so invested in his story. Say this, Bryce Dallas Howard absolutely directs one of the best Star Wars pieces of content that we've ever gotten in the whole entire Disney era. This entire chapter was phenomenal, catching us up with what's been going on with Din without his little friend, meeting back up with the armor and the super heavy Mando, and then super heavy Mando having to fight Din for the Darksaber, and pretty much learning a little bit more about the Darksaber, what has been going on, how did Bo-Katan lose it, what happened to Mandalore itself, which was a really big eye-opening thing. So much touching aspects in here that excited me in so many different ways. I didn't expect to get all of the Mandalorian in this episode, but we truly did, and it was exciting and more. Plus, the opening sequence with him going out to do a job was just spectacular and engaged me from top to bottom. And adding into the end of this episode where he actually gets his new ship, the Naboo Starfighter, that was amazing because that is absolutely my favorite starship fighter out of all of Star Wars. So the fact that Mando is now piloting one, that is insane to me. I overall just love this episode. I think the really big reason that this works is because it's the best directed episode out of the entire season. Every single moment feels paced greatly, but as well as intense. When he's just sitting there like debating if he should put the Darksaber in the case, you actually feel that, no, don't do it. Something bad could happen. And obviously nothing bad did happen. But in those moments, that is what I love about it. And again, I love that now he is not with the armor anymore. That clan doesn't want him because he took his mask off. There's a lot of depth to there, and it just made me more excited for Mandalorian Season 3. In fact, I think this was a perfect first episode for Mandalorian Season 3. But the fact that it happened in Book of Boba Fett, I ain't gonna complain. Guys, that is my ranking of every single episode from the Book of Boba Fett. And as for my final thoughts, I overall liked this season a lot. Loved certain moments. Do not get me wrong. There were certain moments that I was loving, whether it was in Chapter 2 or Chapter 4, or Chapter 5, Chapter 6, even Chapter 7, the one that I felt was a little bit uneven as a finale. There was a lot in here that I liked. I liked the homages to the Old West. I like how they played out that. I just wish the entirety of the story was not as uneven as it needed to be. It feels like they wanted to do more. It feels like there was a lot in here that could have been fleshed out even over a 10-episode arc. And if you didn't want to do 10 episodes, I feel like the story itself needed to be paced a little bit differently. The past first, then the present. It never melded completely well with me, and it always took away from one or the other. If I was very invested with the past, we always went back to the present. If I was starting to get invested with the present, it took away and went back to the past. And that damn Bacta tank might have been the worst villain of this entire show. Overall, though, I enjoyed the Book of Boba Fett for what it is. I honestly think I'll probably only rewatch Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 when I look back at this. And if I were to have kids, I'd be like, yeah, you should watch it one time. I can't fully recommend this, but I can say if you're wanting to continue and kind of figure out what's going to be going on further, you do need to watch it because who knows how it's going to connect in The Mandalorian Season 3, which I'm very, very excited to see what they take on from there. I overall, again, like this season. I wanted a little bit more from it, and I just found it to be uneven. So that is why I'm going to give this show a C+, mostly around the vein of a 7.5 out of 10. So not too bad. It just could have been stronger, and I think it just comes down to its storytelling. Don't get me wrong, though. There were moments in here that were like a 10 out of 10. Like, Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 were some of the best Star Wars content I've ever seen. And of course, guys, that is my ranking and my final thoughts for the Book of Boba Fett. Let me know down below, guys, what your guys' overall thoughts were for the entire show. Really curious to hear those. Remember, this is the way. Hit that like and subscribe button, and let's keep talking movies and TV over here on a daily basis. So, of course, until next time, stay classy.